She didn't know about the $1 million trust fund that had just been transferred into her name. But he knew exactly what he was doing when he drove away. The 3 newborns, triplets, barely 6 weeks old, hadn't stopped crying in rotation for what felt like days, but the formula was gone. The heat had been cut off, and winter had turned the apartment into a tomb of ice and desperation. He had left her, not just emotionally, but completely severed every lifeline. Cancelled phone, drained bank account, intercepted mail. She was starving. 3 babies were starving. But the lawyers who had been trying to reach her couldn't get through because he'd rerouted every call, every letter, every notification about the pharmaceutical fortune that had been hers for 6 weeks. What she did in the 5 days that followed would transform her from a mother on the edge of death into something he never anticipated. But by the time he came crawling back with his practiced tears and manufactured evidence, it was far too late. Had he calculated the exact moment to abandon her? And when the truth finally reached her, when she discovered the inheritance that had been hers all along, would mercy be possible? Or would the winter that nearly killed them become the cold justice he truly deserved? The apartment was so cold that morning that Eileen Madison could see her breath hanging in the air like small ghosts. But the 3 babies bundled in the single bassinet were warm, or as warm as she could keep them, and that was all that mattered in the moment. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, but the hunger pangs had dulled into a distant ache that felt more like a memory than a physical sensation. The snow had been falling since midnight, but the window was drafty, and ice had begun forming on the inside of the glass in delicate, cruel patterns. Victor had left 5 days ago, but the space he'd occupied in her life still felt raw, like a wound that wouldn't close. He'd taken everything, not just his clothes and his expensive watch collection, but the debit card, the checkbook, the emergency cash she'd hidden in the flour canister. But he'd missed the thin gold necklace her mother had left her, the one she'd already pawned 2 weeks before to buy diapers and formula. The formula was gone now too. All 3 containers. But she'd been trying to nurse Noah, George, and Chloe with breasts that produced barely anything because her own body was consuming itself for lack of food. Eileen had been beautiful once. Willowy and graceful with auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and hazel eyes that Victor had said reminded him of autumn leaves. But 5 days of starvation and stress had hollowed her cheeks and darkened the circles beneath those eyes until they looked like bruises. The triplet pregnancy had already taken its toll, but this was something different. This was erasure. She'd met Victor at a charity gala 18 months ago, but their whirlwind romance had hidden the truth about who he really was. He'd been charming and attentive, the kind of man who remembered her coffee order and texted good morning before she woke up. But the mask had begun slipping the moment the ultrasound technician said the word triplets. His face had frozen for just a fraction of a second before the smile returned, but Eileen had seen it. That flash of calculation. He'd been supportive in public, placing his hand protectively on her expanding belly at dinner parties, posting ultrasound photos on social media with captions about being blessed beyond measure. But behind closed doors, he'd grown cold, calculating, distant. He'd started working late. Started sleeping in the guest room because her pregnancy insomnia kept him awake. Started making comments about how expensive 3 babies would be, how her body would never be the same, how she'd probably never work again. The night the triplets were born, early, as multiples often are, after a terrifying 36 hours of labor, Eileen had thought she'd seen tears in Victor's eyes when the nurse placed the first baby in his arms. But looking back now, she wondered if that had been just the reflection of the harsh hospital lights. He'd held little Noah for exactly 3 minutes before handing him back with a comment about needing to give the ladies some space to work. He'd taken a single photo of George and none at all of Chloe. And he'd left the hospital after 20 minutes, citing an emergency at the office that she later learned had been a happy hour with colleagues. The phone on the kitchen counter had been disconnected, but Eileen didn't know that yet when she tried to call the only number she could remember from memory. The women's shelter hotline she'd seen on a poster at her last OB appointment, the one she'd memorized thinking she'd never need it. The automated message said the number was no longer in service. It would be hours before she realized that wasn't true, that the phone itself was dead. She tried to remember when she'd last spoken to anyone besides Victor. Her closest friend from college had stopped calling after Victor mentioned, casually, kindly even, that Eileen found the friendship draining during her difficult pregnancy. Her former co-workers from the graphic design firm had sent a group card when she went on bed rest at 5 months, but Victor had never given it to her. She'd found it weeks later, unopened, in his car's glove compartment. Her mother had died when Eileen was 14, breast cancer that had metastasized before anyone caught it. She'd gone into foster care after that, bouncing between 3 different homes before aging out at 18. No siblings. No extended family that had wanted her. She'd built a life from nothing once before, taught herself graphic design through free online tutorials, worked her way up from freelance gigs to a salaried position. But Victor had convinced her to quit when the pregnancy became high risk. "I make enough for both of us," he'd said. "You should focus on staying healthy. On our family. Our family." The words felt like a cruel joke now. Noah started crying again, that thin, reedy sound that newborns make when they're truly hungry, not just fussy. George joined in moments later, and then Chloe, until the small apartment was filled with the chorus of their desperation. 3 babies. 6 weeks old. All of them failing to thrive because their mother was failing to survive. Eileen tried to stand, but her legs trembled with weakness. The room tilted, and she had to grip the arm of the worn couch to keep from falling. Her vision swam with dark spots. When had she last had water? Yesterday? The day before? The tap still worked, but even that simple journey to the kitchen felt insurmountable. She made it anyway. She always made it anyway. Because the alternative was unthinkable. The kitchen was a study in absence. Empty cabinets. Empty refrigerator. The trash bin overflowing with empty formula containers and dirty diapers because she hadn't had the strength to take it to the dumpster 3 floors down. The sink full of bottles she'd meant to wash but couldn't because the water that came out was so cold it burned her hands. Victor had planned this. She understood that now with the clarity that comes from desperation. He hadn't left in a moment of panic or weakness. He'd systematically cut her off from every resource, every support system, every means of survival. And then he'd walked out the door with his overnight bag and his laptop and his practiced expression of regret. "I just need some space to think," he'd said. "The pressure of 3 babies, the financial stress. I need a few days to clear my head. You understand, don't you, Eileen?" And she'd nodded. God help her. She'd nodded and told him to take all the time he needed. Because she'd believed that loving someone meant giving them space. That marriage meant enduring the hard times. That for better or worse, meant accepting his cruelty as if it were weather, inevitable, impersonal, beyond her control. But there was nothing impersonal about this. About draining their joint account, the one she'd had no access to since he'd simplified their finances during her 3rd trimester. About canceling her phone while keeping his own. About the mail she'd later discover he'd intercepted. About leaving her with 3 newborns in winter with nothing. Eileen filled a bottle with water. It would have to do until she figured something out, and returned to the bassinet where all 3 babies were crying now with the kind of intensity that broke something inside her every time she heard it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, picking up Noah first because he was the smallest, the one the NICU had kept an extra week. "I'm so sorry. Mommy's going to fix this. I promise. I'm going to fix this." But she didn't know how. The laptop Victor had left behind, her old one from before they'd married, sat on the counter, but she hadn't opened it in days. What was the point? Even if she could find freelance work, even if someone hired her immediately, the money wouldn't clear for days. Maybe weeks. And they didn't have days. The snow outside had stopped falling, but the drifts against the building's entrance were knee-high. The superintendent had stopped shoveling 2 days ago. Or maybe 3. Time had become slippery, difficult to track. Days blended into nights, blended into the endless cycle of crying babies and her own body slowly consuming itself. She'd read once that a person could survive 3 weeks without food. But that was a person who wasn't trying to nurse 3 infants. A person who wasn't recovering from a traumatic triplet delivery. A person whose body wasn't already depleted from months of high-risk pregnancy. Eileen looked at Noah, at George, at Chloe, and made a decision. They would not die here. She would not let Victor's cruelty be the last chapter of their story. She would get them to safety. She would find help. And then, though she didn't know this yet, couldn't possibly imagine the revelation waiting just days away, she would discover that she'd never been as powerless as Victor had made her believe. But first, she had to survive the winter. And to do that, she had to be willing to ask for help from strangers when the person who'd promised to love her had chosen to let her die instead. Day 5 without Victor, and Eileen Madison had stopped counting hours. Time had collapsed into a series of urgent needs that repeated in endless rotation. Noah crying from hunger, George needing to be changed with the last diaper, Chloe's skin feeling too cool despite the layers of blankets. Feed one. Soothe another. Watch the third begin to fuss. Repeat. Survive. Somehow, the apartment thermometer read 42 degrees. Eileen knew this because she'd checked it obsessively yesterday, or was it the day before? Trying to calculate exactly how cold was too cold for 6-week-old babies. The pediatrician's number was programmed into the phone that no longer worked. The internet required a connection she couldn't access without that phone. She was operating on fragments of advice half-remembered from hastily skimmed parenting books and the 2-hour new parent class the hospital had required. Keep babies warm. Feed them every 2 to 3 hours. Watch for signs of distress. All 3 babies were in distress. So was she. Eileen tried to remember when she'd last felt warm. Really warm, not just the desperate animal heat of 3 tiny bodies pressed against her own. It seemed impossible now, but there had been a time, just weeks ago, when this apartment had been overheated, when Victor had complained about the cost of heating a ground-floor unit with terrible insulation and drafty windows. She'd met him at the Riverside Children's Hospital charity gala 16 months ago. She'd been there working, hired to design the event program and promotional materials, wearing a borrowed dress because her freelance budget didn't stretch to formal wear. Victor had been there as a donor, impeccably dressed, charming everyone he spoke to. He'd approached her near the silent auction tables, commented on the program design, asked if she'd created it. The typography choices are sophisticated, he'd said, and she'd felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced since her mother died. Most charity events go generic. This feels intentional. They'd talked for an hour. He'd asked about her work, her background, her dreams. He'd listened, or seemed to, with an intensity that felt like sunlight after years in shadow. When he'd asked for her number, she'd given it without hesitation. The courtship had been a whirlwind. Expensive dinners she'd felt awkward attending in her Target wardrobe. Weekends at his apartment that felt like playing house in someone else's life. Compliments that made her feel like she was finally becoming the person she'd always meant to be. "You're so talented," he'd say. "You should be designing for major corporations, not scraping by on freelance gigs." When he'd proposed after 4 months, a modest but tasteful ring presented over champagne she'd barely touched because alcohol made her anxious. She'd said yes because saying no felt like rejecting the only good thing that had ever happened to her. The wedding had been small. City Hall. Just the 2 of them and 2 strangers pulled in as witnesses. Why waste money on a big production? Victor had said, "We can put that toward our future." She'd agreed, ignoring the small voice that wondered why none of his colleagues or family were invited. Ignoring the fact that she had no family left to invite anyway. The pregnancy test had come back positive 7 weeks after the wedding. Victor's face had done something complicated when she'd shown him. A flash of emotion she couldn't quite read before his expression smoothed into pleased surprise. "Well," he'd said slowly, "I guess we're starting our family sooner than planned." The ultrasound at 10 weeks had revealed 3 heartbeats. Triplets. Rare. High risk. The technician had printed out 3 separate images, labeled Baby A, Baby B, Baby C, while explaining the increased monitoring they'd require. Victor had gone very still in his chair. When Eileen had reached for his hand, seeking reassurance, his fingers had been cold. That was when things had started changing. Small things at first. He'd stopped asking about her day. Started taking calls in the other room. Mentioned casually that her friend Kira, the only person from college she still spoke to regularly, had always seemed needy and jealous of your happiness. 2 weeks later, when Kira had stopped calling, Eileen had assumed it was because she'd been too busy to return the last few messages. She'd found out later, much later, that Victor had messaged Kira from Eileen's phone, telling her that the friendship was too draining during a difficult pregnancy. By her 2nd trimester, Eileen was on strict bed rest. The triplets weren't growing at the same rate. Baby C, who would become Chloe, was measuring smaller than her brothers. Weekly ultrasounds. Twice weekly non-stress tests. Victor had suggested she quit her freelance work, just temporarily, until the babies are born and things stabilize. She'd agreed because lifting her laptop made her dizzy, and she'd already had 2 bleeding scares that had sent them to the ER. He'd taken over their finances completely. "One less thing for you to worry about," he'd said, moving her paycheck, the last one she'd received before clients had dried up, into a joint account she couldn't access without him. "I'll handle the bills. You focus on staying healthy." She'd believed he was taking care of her. That was the cruelest part. She'd interpreted his control as concern, his isolation of her as protection. Even when he'd started making comments about how expensive 3 babies would be, how her body would never recover, how she'd probably never work again. Even then, she'd told herself he was just stressed. Processing. That he didn't really mean it. The night the triplets were born, 5 weeks early after her water broke unexpectedly, Victor had held Noah for 3 minutes before handing him back. He'd left the hospital before the lactation consultant arrived. He'd returned the next day with a single bouquet of supermarket flowers and stayed for 20 minutes. "The apartment's a mess," he'd said. "I need to get things ready for you all to come home." He'd had 5 days to prepare. When she'd arrived home with 3 infants and a walker, her cesarean incision still tender, the apartment hadn't been cleaned. There were no diapers stocked. He'd bought 1 container of formula, as if 1 infant would need it, not 3. That should have been her first clue. But she'd been exhausted, overwhelmed, flooded with postpartum hormones that made everything feel both urgent and impossible. She'd ordered supplies online using the credit card, the one Victor later canceled without telling her. Noah's cry pulled her back to the present. Then George. Then Chloe. The 3-part harmony of desperation. Eileen tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She'd given them the last of the watered-down formula an hour ago. Maybe 2 hours. Time was slippery. Her breasts ached with the useless fullness of milk that wouldn't come properly because her body had nothing left to give. She crawled to the bassinet instead. Picked up Noah because he was crying hardest, because he'd always been the most fragile. His diaper was soaked through. She tried to make the last pack stretch by leaving them on longer, and now all 3 babies had angry red rashes. His lips were chapped. His eyes seemed sunken. "I'm sorry," she whispered, rocking him against her chest. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mama's going to fix this." But how? The laptop sat on the counter, but even if she could force her brain to focus long enough to pick up a rush freelance job, the money wouldn't clear for days. A week minimum. And they didn't have days. Looking at Noah's face, at the way his tiny fists clutched weakly at her shirt, she wasn't sure they had hours. The math was brutal and simple. Stay here and they all died, or get to the women's shelter 10 blocks away and maybe they survived. 10 blocks. In knee-deep snow. With 3 6-week-old infants. While she could barely stand. It was impossible. But staying was death. Eileen looked around the apartment with new eyes. Every blanket she owned. The empty diaper bag. Her heaviest coat, thin secondhand but better than nothing. 3 babies who weighed maybe 12 pounds each. She could do this. She had to do this. Moving hurt. Everything hurt. But Eileen had learned over the past 5 days that pain was just information, and she could choose to receive the information and keep moving anyway. She gathered blankets, layering them into the diaper bag to create a nest. Noah first, wrapped until only his face showed. Then George. Then Chloe, the smallest, tucked between her brothers for warmth. The bag was heavier than she'd anticipated. Her arms shook as she lifted it. Her vision swam. She had to pause, breathing through the dizziness, before she could move toward the door. The coat. Her boots, the ones with holes in the soles, but still. A scarf wrapped around her face. The diaper bag crossbody so her hands would be free if she fell. She looked back at the apartment one last time. At the place where Victor had left them to die. At the life she'd thought she was building. Then Eileen Madison stepped into the brutal winter morning, 3 babies against her chest, and chose survival over surrender. The cold hit like a physical blow. The snow was deeper than she'd realized. But she put one foot in front of the other, and then again and kept moving. because the alternative was unthinkable. Because her children deserved better than a mother who gave up. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the hunger and cold and desperation, a small flame of rage had begun to burn. Victor had calculated that she would die quietly, that no one would notice or care, that 3 babies and their inconvenient mother would simply disappear into winter and poverty and the vast indifference of the world. He'd been wrong. Eileen didn't know that yet. Didn't know about the inheritance, the lawyers, the fortune waiting in her name. Didn't know that she was walking toward revelation and justice and a future beyond anything she could imagine. She only knew that she was walking, that her children were still breathing, that the shelter was 9 blocks away, then 8, then 7. And with each step through the snow, Eileen Madison was becoming someone Victor Duval had never anticipated, a woman who refused to die for his convenience. The first block took 20 minutes. Eileen had to stop 3 times, leaning against buildings, the diaper bag's weight dragging her down like an anchor. The babies were crying, all 3 of them, but the sound was muffled by blankets and wind. She tried to soothe them, but her voice came out as a rasp. When had she last had water? The second block she fell. Just went down, her knees hitting the sidewalk hard enough that she felt it through her jeans. The diaper bag swung forward, and for one terrible moment she thought she'd crushed the babies against the concrete, but she managed to twist, landing on her hip instead. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She lay there in the snow, 3 infants crying against her chest, and seriously considered just staying down. But George's cry shifted into something more urgent. Desperate. The sound a baby makes when they're past hungry, past cold, moving into real distress. Eileen got up. By block 4, she'd stopped feeling her feet. By block 6, she was crying, silent tears freezing on her cheeks. By block 8, she wasn't sure which direction she was walking anymore. Everything looked the same. White snow, gray buildings, a sky the color of old ice. She fell again at block 9, and this time she couldn't get up on her first try. Or her second. Her body simply wouldn't respond. She knelt there in the snow, 3 babies wailing, and thought, this is where we die. Not in the apartment, but here. 50 yards from help. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. The voice came from somewhere above her. Eileen tried to look up, but her neck wouldn't cooperate. Hands on her shoulders. Strong hands. Can you stand? No, don't try yet. How many babies? 3. The word came out as a whisper. 3? Lord help us. Claire. Claire, get out here. More hands. More voices. Someone lifted the diaper bag from her chest, and the sudden absence of weight made her gasp. Someone else was supporting her under her arms, hauling her to her feet. She tried to walk, but her legs buckled. I've got her. You take the babies. Careful, there's 3 of them. 3. Mother of God. Move, Claire. Get them inside. Now. Eileen was being half carried, half dragged. Her boots scraped across concrete. Warmth hit her face like a slap, so sudden and shocking that she actually cried out. The hands eased her into a chair, soft, cushioned, the first soft thing she'd touched in days. Blankets. And call Dr. Reeves. Tell her it's an emergency. Eileen forced her eyes open. The room swam into focus slowly. A reception area, worn but clean, with a space heater glowing orange in the corner. A Christmas tree in the lobby, lights twinkling. The smell of coffee and something baking. Behind a desk, a large woman with steel-gray hair and kind eyes was already on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. 3 babies, another voice was saying. Maybe 2 months old? They're underdressed, hypothermic. The mother's worse. I think she's severely malnourished, a new voice cut in. Brisk, professional. How long since you've eaten, sweetheart? Eileen tried to answer, but couldn't make her mouth form words. The room was spinning. Get formula warming. 3 bottles. And get some broth into her before she loses consciousness. Hands tilting her head back. Something warm against her lips, a cup. The smell of chicken broth. Eileen drank without thinking, her body taking over. The liquid burned going down her throat, but she didn't care. She drank until the cup was empty. Good. Good girl. Again. Slow sips now. More broth. Her vision was clearing. She could see the babies now, all 3 of them being examined by a woman in scrubs, their blankets peeled away, stethoscope moving across tiny chests. Noah was still crying. George and Chloe had gone quiet, which was somehow worse. Are they? Eileen couldn't finish the question. They're alive, the nurse said firmly. Dehydrated, undernourished, but alive. You got them here in time. Barely, but in time. The woman with gray hair, the one who'd first spotted Eileen, knelt beside her chair. Up close, she was probably 60, with laugh lines around her eyes and a crucifix on a chain around her neck. I'm Sister Margaret, she said gently. You're at Hope Haven Women's Shelter. You're safe now. What's your name, honey? Eileen. Her voice was stronger now. The broth was working. Eileen Madison. And the babies? Noah. George. Chloe. Triplets. 6 weeks old. Sister Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. 6 weeks. And you're here alone. It wasn't a question, but Eileen nodded anyway. Where's their father, Eileen? And suddenly, without meaning to, without planning it, the whole story came tumbling out. Meeting Victor. The whirlwind romance. The triplets. His mask slipping. The systematic isolation. Her friends cut off, her work ended, her finances controlled. The bed rest. The birth. His coldness. And then 5 days ago, him leaving. Taking everything. Canceling her phone. Draining their account. Leaving her with 3 newborns in a freezing apartment with nothing. Sister Margaret listened without interrupting. When Eileen finished, voice hoarse, tears streaming down her face, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. I've seen this before, Sister Margaret finally said, her voice hard with something that might have been anger. Men who leave aren't usually this thorough unless they're hiding something. The canceled phone, the drained account, the isolation, that's not abandonment born of weakness, Eileen. That's strategy. I don't understand. He was making sure you couldn't reach out. Couldn't get help. Couldn't find out something he didn't want you to know. Sister Margaret leaned forward. Eileen, have you checked your mail recently? Physical mail, I mean. Letters. Official correspondence. Eileen blinked, confused by the shift in topic. I know. The mailbox is in the lobby. I haven't been able to get downstairs in weeks. Not since the bed rest, and then after the babies came, I couldn't manage the stairs with them alone, and Victor said he'd. She stopped. Victor had said he'd check the mail. Bring up anything important. When did you last see an actual piece of mail? Sister Margaret pressed. I don't know. Months. Before the bed rest, maybe. Sister Margaret and the nurse, Dr. Reeves, she'd called herself, exchanged a look. Sometimes, Sister Margaret said carefully, men intercept important documents. Financial notifications. Legal correspondence. Especially when there's money involved. There's no money, Eileen said automatically. We were barely getting by. That's what Victor always said. What Victor said and what's true might be very different things. Sister Margaret stood. Right now you need food and rest. The babies need formula and monitoring. But tomorrow, when you're stronger, I think we should go to your apartment building together. Check that mailbox. Why would there be anything? Call it instinct, Sister Margaret said. 20 years running this shelter, I've seen patterns. And your husband's behavior fits a very specific pattern. Men don't usually put this much effort into making a woman disappear unless they're protecting something. Usually something financial. Eileen wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. Dr. Reeves was guiding her to stand, leading her toward a door marked "Emergency Overnight." The babies are right here, Dr. Reeves said, gesturing to where a volunteer was settling all 3 triplets into a single crib, bottles propped carefully. We'll monitor them through the night. You need to sleep, Eileen. Your body's running on empty. The room was small but warm. A twin bed with clean sheets. A space heater humming in the corner. Through the doorway, she could see the crib where her babies slept. Really slept for the first time in days. Noah's face had relaxed. George had stopped fussing. Even tiny Chloe looked peaceful. Sister Margaret appeared in the doorway with a tray. Soup. Bread. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and it's real. Eat slowly, your stomach won't handle much yet. Eileen took the tray with shaking hands. The soup was simple, vegetable with barley, but it tasted like salvation. She ate half before her stomach protested, then finished the bread, soaking it in the broth. Tomorrow, Sister Margaret said, settling into the chair beside the bed. We'll check that mailbox. We'll figure out what your husband was hiding. And we'll make sure you and these babies are taken care of. She paused. But tonight, Eileen Madison, I want you to understand something. You survived. You got 3 babies through a blizzard when you could barely walk. That takes strength most people don't have. Whatever happens next, whatever we find tomorrow, you're stronger than you know. Eileen wanted to believe that, wanted to feel strong. But mostly she felt broken. Still, as she lay down in the warm bed, listening to her babies breathe peacefully for the first time in 5 days, something small and fragile flickered in her chest. Not strength. Not yet. But hope. Eileen woke to the sound of babies cooing. Not crying, cooing, and for a disorienting moment couldn't remember where she was. The room was warm. The bed was soft. Through the doorway, she could see Noah, George, and Chloe in their crib, awake but content, while a volunteer gently changed diapers. "Good morning," Dr. Reeves said, appearing with a breakfast tray. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." But even as she said it, Eileen realized she felt better than she had in weeks. Her head was clearer. The desperate, gnawing hunger had eased into normal appetite. "The babies are doing much better. We've been feeding them every 2 hours through the night. They're responding well." Dr. Reeves set down the tray. Oatmeal, toast, orange juice, a banana. "Eat. You need to rebuild your strength." Sister Margaret appeared as Eileen was finishing breakfast. "Whenever you're ready," she said. Claire's offered to watch the triplets. "I think we should check that mailbox." 20 minutes later, Eileen found herself in Sister Margaret's ancient station wagon, Claire from the shelter in the back seat. The drive took 5 minutes, a journey that had taken her 2 hours on foot. When they pulled up to her building, Eileen felt her stomach clench. Victor might be. "If he's there, Sister Margaret said calmly. "But men like that don't usually come back until they're ready to play the hero. Give it a few more days." The lobby was exactly as Eileen remembered. Dingy carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of mildew and old cooking. The mailboxes lined one wall, small brass doors with combination locks. Eileen's hands shook as she spun the dial. March 17th, 29, her mother's death date. The lock clicked open. The box was stuffed so full that mail cascaded out when she opened it. Grocery store circulars. Credit card offers. Bills in red envelopes marked final notice. And 3 cream-colored envelopes, heavy stock, with a return address embossed in gold. Bernard and Associates Law Firm, Boston, Massachusetts. "Those," Sister Margaret said quietly, pointing to the cream envelopes. "Open those first." Eileen's fingers were numb as she tore open the first envelope. The letter inside was dated 7 weeks ago, right around when Victor had left. "Dear Ms. Madison, we are writing to inform you of a matter requiring your immediate attention regarding the estate of Diane Catherine Rothman, deceased." The words swam. Eileen blinked, tried to focus. Pharmaceutical patents and investments valued at approximately $85 million US. Sole surviving heir. Genetic verification completed through medical records. "Please contact our office immediately." "I don't understand," Eileen whispered. Sister Margaret took the letter, scanned it quickly. Her expression went very still. "Eileen, who was Diane Rothman?" My mother's sister?" "Maybe. My mother was Diane Madison before she married my father. But she had a sister she didn't talk about. They were estranged." Eileen tried to remember. Her mother had rarely spoken about her family. "There was a fight. Before I was born. Something about my mom marrying my dad instead of, I don't know. Someone her family approved of." Open the second letter. The second envelope was dated 3 weeks later. The tone was more urgent. "Ms. Madison, we have not received a response to our previous correspondence. This is a matter of extreme urgency. The estate of Diane Catherine Rothman cannot be settled until we verify your identity and intentions. Please contact us immediately at the number below, or we will be forced to pursue legal channels to locate you." $85 million, Claire said from behind them, her voice faint. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph." The third letter was dated 2 weeks ago. "Ms. Madison, our attempts to reach you by mail, phone, and email have been unsuccessful. We have sent 2 courier packages to your address, both of which were signed for, but you have not responded. If we do not hear from you within 5 business days, we will be contacting local authorities to conduct a welfare check." Victor signed for them, Eileen said. The realization was a physical thing, cold and heavy in her chest. He signed for courier packages. He knew. Sister Margaret's jaw was tight. He knew, and he left you to starve. Eileen sank down onto the lobby floor, letters scattered around her. Her mother's sister. Aunt Diane. She had vague memories of her mother mentioning a sister once, late at night after too much wine, tears in her eyes. She chose money over family, her mother had said. But maybe I chose poverty over pride. I don't know who was right. Her mother had died when Eileen was 14. Breast cancer caught too late. There'd been no money for aggressive treatment, no money for anything. Eileen had gone into foster care because there was no family to take her. No aunt who'd swooped in to save her orphan niece. But maybe Aunt Diane hadn't known. Maybe the estrangement had been complete enough that she hadn't known her sister was dead, or that there was a niece who needed help. "The letter says genetic verification through medical records," Claire observed, reading over Sister Margaret's shoulder. "They used your mother's medical records to confirm the relationship. Your aunt must have been looking for you." Sister Margaret pulled out her phone. "What's the number on that letterhead?" Eileen read it off, her voice mechanical. Sister Margaret dialed, put the phone on speaker. "Bernard and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "This is Sister Margaret O'Brien from Hope Haven Women's Shelter in New York. I'm calling on behalf of Eileen Madison regarding the Diane Rothman estate." A pause. "One moment, please." The hold music was classical. Mozart, maybe. Eileen felt like she was floating outside her body, watching this happen to someone else. "This is Margaret Bernard." The voice was crisp, professional, but with an undertone of something else. "Concern? Relief? Did you say Eileen Madison?" "I did. I have her here with me." "Thank God." The professional veneer cracked. "Ms. Madison, are you there? Are you safe?" Eileen took the phone with shaking hands. "I'm here. I just found your letters. I didn't know. I didn't. Ms. Madison, I need you to listen carefully. Can you verify your mother's full maiden name and your date of birth?" "Diane Catherine Madison. And I was born March 15th, 1996. "Your mother's date of death?" "November 17th, 2010. A sharp exhale. "It's her. It's really her." A pause, then Margaret Bernard's voice became crisp again. "Ms. Madison, we have been trying to reach you for 7 weeks. Your husband, Victor Duval, signed for 2 courier packages we sent. We have the delivery confirmations with his signature. Did he give you those packages?" "No." The word came out as a whisper. "Where is he now?" "He left. 6 days ago. He took everything, the money, my phone, he canceled everything. Left me with our babies with nothing." Another pause. When Margaret Bernard spoke again, her voice was cold with fury. "How many babies?" "Triplets. 6 weeks old." Jesus Christ. The attorney's composure cracked completely. "Ms. Madison, I need you to understand something. Your Aunt Diane spent the last 5 years of her life searching for you. She hired private investigators. She went through court records. When she finally found proof that your mother had died and that you existed, she was already sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She changed her will immediately, left everything to you. The estate is worth approximately $85 million. Pharmaceutical patents, real estate, investments. You are, as of 7 weeks ago, one of the wealthiest women in Massachusetts." The lobby tilted. Eileen felt Sister Margaret's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Your husband knew," Margaret Bernard continued. "He signed for those packages. He knew what was in them, or at least knew enough to intercept them. Ms. Madison, this was not abandonment. This was calculation. And it's also several federal crimes. Mail fraud. Forgery. Possibly more. I don't." Eileen couldn't finish. Couldn't breathe. "Ms. Madison, where are you right now? Are you somewhere safe?" "Hope Haven Women's Shelter. On East 47th. Don't move. I'm sending a car. It'll be there in 2 hours. Bring whatever identification you have, driver's license, birth certificate, anything. And bring your babies. We have a medical team standing by. We need to get you checked out properly, document your condition and theirs. And then we need to start building a case against your husband." "A case? For mail fraud, forgery, identity theft, and whatever else we can make stick. Margaret Bernard's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Ms. Madison, Eileen, your Aunt Diane wanted you to have this money. She wanted you to have the life your mother couldn't give you. And I'll be damned if I let some predator steal it from you. Do you understand? Yes. 2 hours. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't contact your husband. Don't tell anyone about this except the people in that room with you right now. Can you do that? Yes. Good. We're going to fix this, Eileen. I promise you, we're going to fix this. The call ended. Eileen sat on the lobby floor, surrounded by junk mail and bills and 3 cream-colored letters that had changed everything. Sister Margaret crouched beside her, Claire hovering behind. $85 million, Claire repeated, as if saying it again would make it real. But Eileen wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about her mother. About dying at 42 from a treatable cancer because there was no money for treatment. About a sister who'd spent 5 years searching for the niece she'd never met. About Victor, who'd known, and had left her to die anyway. He knew, she said again. He knew, and he left us to freeze and starve. Sister Margaret's expression was grim. Yes, he did. And now we're going to make sure he answers for it. Eileen looked down at the letters in her hands. At the impossible numbers. At proof that her mother's sister had cared enough to search, even if she'd found them too late. And beneath the shock and confusion and disbelief, something else began to burn. Not hope. Not anymore. Fury. The car that arrived at Hope Haven wasn't what Eileen expected. A black SUV with tinted windows, a driver who introduced himself as security, and car seats, 3 of them already installed. Someone had thought of everything. The drive to Boston took 4 hours. Eileen spent most of it staring out the window, 3 babies sleeping peacefully in their seats, Sister Margaret beside her squeezing her hand whenever the silence grew too heavy. Bernard and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building overlooking the harbor. But they didn't go to the offices. Instead, the SUV pulled around to a private entrance, and they were escorted to what the driver called the secure medical wing. We maintain it for clients who need privacy, he explained, as if every law firm had a private hospital floor. Dr. Sarah Chin was waiting in the examination room, petite, sharp-eyed, with gentle hands that moved efficiently over Eileen's body. Blood pressure, heart rate, blood work, physical exam. The doctor's expression grew grimmer with each assessment. Severe malnutrition, Dr. Chin said, making notes on her tablet. Dehydration. Postpartum anemia that should have been caught weeks ago. When was your last postpartum checkup? There wasn't one. Victor said we couldn't afford. You had insurance through his employer, Dr. Chin interrupted, checking something on her screen. Full coverage. The appointments were scheduled. Someone canceled them. She looked up. Was that you? No. I didn't even know they were scheduled. Dr. Chen's jaw tightened. Of course you didn't. She turned to the triplets, examining each one with meticulous care. Noah first, then George, then tiny Chloe. Failure to thrive. All 3. Not severe yet, but another week. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. But they'll be okay? Eileen's voice cracked. They'll be fine. You got them help in time. Dr. Chin squeezed her shoulder. You saved them, Ms. Madison. Remember that. Margaret Bernard arrived as the medical team was setting up 4 fluids for Eileen. Her dehydration was too severe for oral rehydration alone. The attorney was exactly what Eileen had imagined from her voice. Late 50s, silver hair in a sleek bob designer suit, but with kind eyes that missed nothing. How is she? Margaret asked Dr. Chin. Malnourished, dehydrated, physically exhausted. Another few days, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Margaret's expression went cold. She turned to Eileen. I'm sorry you're going through this. But I need you to understand something. What your husband did wasn't just cruel. It was criminal. And we're going to prove it. She gestured to 2 people who'd entered behind her. This is David Okonkwo, our senior investigator, and Rachel Kim, digital forensics specialist. They've been working since I called you this morning. David was tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in law enforcement. Rachel was younger, maybe 30, with purple-streaked hair and multiple screens open on the laptop she carried. Ms. Madison, David said gently, I need to ask you some questions. Some of them might be difficult, but everything you tell us helps build the case. For the next hour, while 4 fluids dripped into her arm and nurses monitored the triplets, Eileen told them everything. Meeting Victor, the courtship, the isolation, the pregnancy, his coldness, the abandonment. She showed them the texts he'd sent, the ones she could access on her old laptop, which Rachel immediately confiscated. I need to examine this, Rachel said. But I can already tell you someone's been in your system. See these processes running in the background. Monitoring software. Keyloggers. Email forwarding rules. She typed rapidly. He was tracking everything you did online. Every email. Every search. Every document you opened. Eileen felt sick. For how long? Based on the installation dates, 7 months. Right around the time you would have been starting your second trimester. 7 months. He'd been watching her for 7 months. There's more, Rachel continued, pulling up email logs. Someone, I'm assuming your husband, set up forwarding rules on your email account. Any message containing the words inheritance, estate, trust, Diane, or Rothman was automatically forwarded to a hidden folder only he could access, then marked as read and archived. You never saw them. How many emails? Margaret asked. Rachel checked. 14. All from our firm, trying to reach her. David slid a folder across the table. We also have the courier delivery confirmations. Both packages were signed for by someone at your address. The signature says E. Madison, but handwriting analysis confirms it's not your signature. The angle is wrong. The pressure's different. And the writing is too angular to be female hand patterns. He forged my signature, Eileen said numbly. Yes, which is mail fraud. A federal crime. Margaret took over. David also discovered something else. Victor researched state marital property laws extensively. Specifically, he researched how long a marriage needs to last before a spouse can claim equitable distribution of assets acquired during the marriage. In New York, David said, there's no fixed time frame, but courts generally consider marriages under a year to be short-term, which limits asset division. However, if he could establish a pattern of support and reconciliation attempts after a temporary separation, he could argue for a longer-term marriage classification. He was planning to come back, Eileen whispered. Not just come back, Margaret corrected. He was planning to document his concern for you and the babies during the separation. My guess is he'd have sent cards, maybe money orders, kept records of attempts to reconcile, that you rejected. Then, after enough time passed, he'd file for divorce and claim he was entitled to half your inheritance. But he left us to starve. He calculated you'd be desperate enough to accept help from anyone, friends, shelters, churches. He didn't think you'd die. Or he thought if you did, there'd be no evidence connecting him to it. Just a tragic case of a new mother who couldn't cope. Margaret's voice was ice. But he made mistakes. He was too thorough, too controlling. And he didn't count on someone like Sister Margaret asking the right questions. Rachel cleared her throat. There's something else. I ran a background check. Victor was in a relationship 3 years ago with a woman named Jennifer Lassiter. She received a small inheritance, $200,000, from her grandmother. 2 months later, Victor ended the relationship. Jennifer filed a police report claiming he'd stolen money from her, but she couldn't prove it and eventually dropped the charges. He's done this before, Eileen said. At least once. Possibly more. We're still digging. David leaned forward. Ms. Madison, the evidence we have is substantial. Mail fraud. Forgery. Identity theft. Potentially financial exploitation. We can have him arrested. But, Eileen heard the unspoken word. Margaret smiled thinly. But we could also be strategic about it. Right now, Victor thinks he's gotten away with this. He thinks you're still trapped, still desperate. If we wait, let him make his move. We catch him in the act, Eileen finished. We get him to incriminate himself. Exactly. Margaret pulled out another folder. The estate has been legally transferred to you as of this morning. You are now worth $85 million. But we can leak false information. Say you're contesting a much smaller inheritance. 5 million, maybe. Enough to get his attention, not enough to reveal the truth. And when he shows up, we record everything. We let him perform his rehearsed apologies. And then we show him exactly what he's done, and exactly what he's lost. Margaret's expression was predatory. But this is your choice, Eileen. We can have him arrested tonight if that's what you want. Or we can give you the satisfaction of watching him realize he threw away everything for a plan that was always going to fail. Eileen looked at her babies, sleeping peacefully under clean blankets in a warm room. She thought about 5 days of starvation, about the moment she'd realized she might die, about Victor signing for packages meant for her, intercepting emails, watching her every move, calculating how to steal from her while letting her believe he loved her. I want him to understand exactly what he did, she said quietly. I want him to know that he left his children to die for money. I want him to see their faces and know what he traded them for. She looked up, meeting Margaret's eyes. And then I want justice. I want him prosecuted for everything. I want it on record that he did this, so no other woman falls for his act. Can you do that? Margaret Bernard smiled, a real smile this time, warm and fierce. Ms. Madison, it would be my absolute pleasure. Dr. Chen returned with clipboard in hand. I'm admitting you overnight for observation. All 4 of you. You need 4 nutrition, and the babies need monitoring. But after that, she glanced at Margaret. After that, I think you're in very good hands. That night, in a private room with 3 bassinets and round-the-clock nursing care, Eileen held her babies and watched the city lights sparkle through the window. Somewhere out there, Victor thought he'd won. Thought he'd successfully positioned himself to steal a fortune. He had no idea that the desperate woman he'd abandoned had become something far more dangerous. A woman with resources, allies, and a crystal-clear understanding of exactly who he was. The trap was being set, and Victor Duval was going to walk right into it. Margaret Bernard's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Legal gossip, she explained to Eileen 3 days after the medical team had cleared her for discharge, travels faster than wildfire, especially when money's involved. They were in Margaret's corner office, windows overlooking Boston Harbor. The triplets were in the building's childcare facility, another amenity Eileen was still getting used to, being watched by professionals while she learned how to be the kind of woman who commanded rooms instead of apologizing for being in them. We'll leak it through a paralegal at a firm that handles divorce cases, Margaret continued, pointing to a flow chart on her screen. Someone who's known for talking too much at bar association events. We tell her we're representing a client named Eileen Madison who's contesting a modest inheritance, let's say $5 million, and needs help dealing with a difficult estranged husband. $5 million is modest? Eileen still couldn't wrap her head around the numbers. In the circles Victor wants to run in? It's noteworthy but not extraordinary. Enough to make him salivate. Not enough to make him suspicious about why he didn't know the full amount. Margaret pulled up another screen. David's been tracking Victor's digital activity. He's been busy. David Okonkwo appeared on the video screen. He was in New York, stationed near Victor's last known location. He's staying at the Meridian Hotel in Midtown. $400 a night. Paying with a credit card that's nearly maxed out. He's also been hitting high-end bars, maintaining appearances. Networking, or trying to. Can he afford that? Eileen asked. No. He's drowning in debt. We pulled his credit report, legally, through the investigation. He's got 6 credit cards, all carrying balances. Total debt around $80,000. He's been making minimum payments by shuffling balances between cards. It's a house of cards, and it's about to collapse. Rachel Kim joined the video call from her workstation. He's also been researching. I've been monitoring his browsing history through the phone linked to his cloud account. In the past week, he's visited 17 divorce attorney websites, 12 articles about asset division in New York marriages, and 8 sites about spousal support calculations. He's planning his return, Margaret said with satisfaction. He just doesn't know we're 10 steps ahead. The leak happened on a Thursday. Margaret's paralegal mentioned it, casually, as if sharing interesting gossip, to a colleague at a networking event. By Friday morning, it had made its way through the legal community's informal channels. By Friday afternoon, David reported activity. He's biting, David said over video. Just spent 3 hours at a coffee shop researching Bernard and Associates. Then he looked up asset recovery specialists and contested inheritance law. He's getting excited. How long until he makes contact? Eileen asked. She'd been staying in a secure apartment Bernard and Associates maintained for clients. A beautiful space in Back Bay with everything she and the babies needed. But despite the luxury, she couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about Victor out there plotting. My guess? 48 hours, Margaret said. He'll want to make it seem spontaneous. Like he's been struck by sudden regret and just discovered where you are. It took 36. The flowers arrived at Bernard and Associates' reception on Saturday morning. 24 roses, expensive but not ostentatious. The card was handwritten in Victor's careful script. Eileen, I made a terrible mistake. The pressure of 3 babies, the financial stress, the fear of failing as a father, it overwhelmed me. I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But I've been getting help. Seeing a therapist. Working on myself. Please let me come home. Let me be the father Noah, George, and Chloe deserve. Let me be the husband you deserved all along. I love you. I never stopped loving you. V. Margaret photographed the card from every angle before Eileen could read it. Evidence, she said. Every word of this is calculated. Getting help. Working on myself. These are phrases from a script. Let me show you something. She pulled up surveillance footage on her laptop. Victor, sitting in a coffee shop, his phone propped against a water glass, reading from a notebook and mouthing words. Rehearsing. He's been practicing this apology for 3 days, David said, joining them in Margaret's office. He's also consulted with an image consultant. Paid her $2,000 he doesn't have. She advised him on what to wear, how to present himself as vulnerable but working on recovery. It's all performance. Eileen stared at the flowers. She'd loved roses once. Victor had sent them when they first started dating. Now they just looked like props in a play she hadn't auditioned for. What do I do? You let him come, Margaret said. We'll schedule a meeting here in our conference room. Top floor. We've designed it specifically for this kind of confrontation. The conference room was intimidating by design. 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, a massive table of polished walnut. The chairs on one side, where Eileen and Margaret would sit, were positioned with the windows behind them, so anyone facing them would have to squint into the light. The chairs on the other side were slightly lower, a subtle psychological disadvantage. Every detail matters, Margaret explained. We want him off balance from the moment he walks in. We want him feeling like he's not in control, even though he'll think he is. Over the next 3 days, Margaret coached Eileen. How to sit, how to breathe, how to maintain composure when Victor deployed his charm or his tears or his anger. All of which Margaret assured her he would try. He'll cycle through tactics, Margaret said. He'll start with remorse. When that doesn't work, he'll try guilt. Remind you of the good times, make you feel like you're abandoning your marriage. If that fails, he'll get angry, try to make you feel small. And if all else fails, he'll beg. How do you know? Because I've been doing this for 30 years. Men like Victor are depressingly predictable. Margaret pulled up a file. We also found his ex-girlfriend, Jennifer. She agreed to talk to us. Victor used the exact same playbook with her. Same flowers. Similar apology card. Same, I'm getting help script. It worked on her. She took him back. And then he disappeared with her money. Eileen felt her hands curl into fists. He's done this before. At least once that we can prove. Probably more. Margaret leaned forward. That's why it's important we nail him this time. Get everything on record. Make sure he can't do it to anyone else. They rehearsed the confrontation. Margaret playing Victor, Rachel playing Eileen, showing her how to stay calm, how to let him incriminate himself, how to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. You don't need to be cruel, Margaret said. You just need to be clear. Let him dig his own grave with his lies. We'll provide the evidence. All you have to do is stand firm. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. Margaret sent a formal email to the address on Victor's card. Mr. Duval, Ms. Madison has agreed to meet with you in our offices to discuss your marriage and recent separation. Tuesday, February 14th at 2 p.m. Please come alone. Valentine's Day, Eileen noticed. Margaret smiled thinly. I thought the irony was appropriate. The night before the meeting, Eileen couldn't sleep. She held Noah, then George, then Chloe, memorizing their faces. These were the children Victor had been willing to let die. These were the babies he'd abandoned in winter with nothing. And tomorrow, he was going to walk into that office pretending to be a devoted father who'd simply made a mistake. Sister Margaret had traveled up from New York for the meeting. She sat with Eileen in the secure apartment, drinking tea and talking about anything except tomorrow. "However this goes," Sister Margaret said as she was leaving, "remember that you've already won. You survived. You saved your babies. Everything else is just details." But the details mattered. The details were justice. Tuesday morning, Margaret walked Eileen through the plan one final time. "We'll record everything, video and audio. It's legal in Massachusetts with single-party consent, and you're consenting. David will be in the next room, monitoring. Rachel will be tracking in case he tries anything digital. And I'll be right beside you. What if I freeze?" "You won't. You know why? Because you've already faced worse than Victor Duval. You walked 10 blocks through a blizzard with 3 dying babies and no food. Sitting across a table from him is nothing compared to that." At 1:45 p.m., Eileen took her position in the conference room. Dark blue suit that Margaret had bought her. Hair pulled back. Minimal makeup. She looked professional, composed, and completely unlike the desperate woman Victor had left to die. At 1:58 p.m., the receptionist called. "Mr. Duval is here." "Send him up," Margaret said. Eileen's heart was pounding. She forced herself to breathe slowly. In for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. The technique Dr. Chin had taught her. The elevator dinged. Footsteps in the hallway. And then the conference room door opened. Victor Duval walked in wearing an expensive charcoal suit she'd never seen before. His hair was freshly cut. His shoes were polished. He looked like a man who'd been taking care of himself, not one who'd left his family to starve. But what struck Eileen most was his expression. Practiced devastation. Rehearsed remorse. Every line of his body language screaming, "I'm a good man who made a mistake." It was all performance. Every bit of it. And Eileen was about to pull back the curtain. Victor's eyes found Eileen immediately, and his expression crumpled into something that might have looked like relief if she hadn't known better. "Eileen," he breathed, taking a step toward her. "God, I've been so worried." "Mr. Duval." Margaret's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Please sit down." Victor hesitated, seeming to notice Margaret for the first time. His gaze flicked between her and Eileen, recalculating. "Of course. I'm sorry. I'm just seeing Eileen again, seeing that she's okay." His voice caught perfectly. Hours of practice, Eileen thought, remembering the surveillance footage of him rehearsing. He sat across from them, positioning himself carefully, shoulders slightly hunched, hands visible on the table, open body language. The image consultant's work. "Ms. Madison," he began, and Eileen noticed he didn't call her by her first name now. More formal. More respectful. All calculated. "I owe you an apology that I know I can never adequately express. What I did was unforgivable. I had a complete breakdown. The pressure of 3 babies, the financial stress, the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly being a father to triplets. I wasn't strong enough. I failed you. I failed our children." He paused, letting the words land. Eileen kept her expression neutral, exactly as Margaret had coached her. "But I've been getting help," Victor continued, leaning forward slightly. "Real help. I've been seeing a therapist 3 times a week. I've been working through my anxiety, my fear of inadequacy. I've been learning how to be the man you deserve, the father Noah, George, and Chloe deserve." He swallowed hard, another practice gesture. "I know I have no right to ask for another chance. But I'm asking anyway. Please. Let me come home. Let me make this right. I love you, Eileen. I never stopped loving you." The silence stretched. Victor's eyes were wet, real tears or manufactured ones. Eileen couldn't tell anymore. Didn't matter. Margaret opened a folder on the table. "Mr. Duval, before we continue this conversation, I think we should review some documents." Victor's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into concerned confusion. "Documents? I don't understand." "These are courier delivery confirmations," Margaret said, sliding papers across the table. 2 packages sent to Ms. Madison's address from this law firm. Both signed for. Can you identify the signature? Victor picked up the papers, studied them. "This says E. Madison." "Yes, but it's not Ms. Madison's signature." Margaret placed another document beside it. This is Ms. Madison's actual signature, from her driver's license, her marriage license, and various other legal documents. As you can see, the handwriting is distinctly different. The courier signatures are written by someone else. Someone who forged her name. Victor's hands had gone still. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Margaret pulled out more documents. This is a forensic handwriting analysis. The courier signatures match your handwriting, Mr. Duval. You signed for packages addressed to your wife. You opened them, and you never told her they existed. I must have signed for them thinking they were for the household. These are the contents of those packages. Margaret slid letters across the table. Notification that Ms. Madison had inherited a substantial estate. Time-sensitive legal documents requiring her immediate attention. You intercepted them. Victor's jaw tightened. Eileen, you have to understand. We're not done, Margaret interrupted. This is a forensic analysis of Ms. Madison's laptop and email account. Someone installed monitoring software 7 months ago. Someone set up email forwarding rules to intercept any correspondence containing words like inheritance, estate, or trust. That same someone accessed her accounts regularly, reading her emails, tracking her activity. Was that you, Mr. Duval? The mask was slipping now. Victor's expression cycled through confusion, calculation, searching for an angle. I was concerned about her. During a difficult pregnancy, you were surveilling her. And when you discovered she was inheriting money, you made a choice. Margaret's voice was cold steel. You researched marital property law. You looked into how long a marriage needed to last before you could claim assets. You calculated the optimal timing to leave, establish separation, and return later to claim your share. That's insane. You left her with 3 newborns in a freezing apartment with no money, no phone, and no food. You canceled her phone service. You drained the bank account. You knew about the inheritance before you left, Mr. Duval. And you left her to die anyway because it served your financial strategy. Victor's face had gone red. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I've seen men like you before. Men who see women as resources to exploit. Men who calculate and manipulate and... Eileen. Victor turned to her, desperation creeping into his voice. You can't believe this. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I handled things badly. But I never meant to hurt you. You think you're better than me now? Is that it? You found some lawyer who's filling your head with conspiracy theories, making you think. You left 3 6-week-old babies to starve, Eileen said. Her voice was calm, steady, and it cut through Victor's building rant like a scalpel. Not because you had a breakdown, because you thought it would give you leverage later. Victor's mouth opened, closed. That's not. You calculated everything except my survival. Eileen stood, walked to the window. The harbor stretched out below, sparkling in afternoon light. You thought I'd die quietly, or end up in some shelter where you could swoop in later as the concerned husband who'd been searching for his lost family. You thought either way, you'd position yourself to claim money you had no right to. Eileen, I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. You left us to freeze and starve. She turned to face him. You canceled my phone so I couldn't call for help. You took every penny so I couldn't buy food. You intercepted legal documents that could have saved us. You knew I might die. You knew your children might die. And you did it anyway. It wasn't. I just needed time to think. You needed time to research divorce law and asset division. Eileen's voice remained eerily calm. Margaret showed me your browser history, Victor. I know what websites you visited. I know what you were planning. Victor's composure cracked completely. You think you're so much better than me? You were nothing when I met you, Eileen. A foster kid with no family, no prospects, scraping by on freelance work. I gave you everything. I gave you a life, a home, a future. You gave me systematic isolation and calculated abuse. I gave you my name. I married you when no one else would have wanted. You married me because you thought I had no one. No family to ask questions. No support system to notice when you started controlling me. You thought I was perfect prey. Eileen walked back to the table. But you made a mistake, Victor. You got greedy. You saw the word inheritance and couldn't resist. And your greed is going to cost you everything. What are you talking about? Eileen met his eyes. I inherited $85 million, Victor. Not the $5 million you read about in legal gossip. $85 million from my Aunt Diane's pharmaceutical empire. Patents, real estate, investments. The full estate. Victor's face went gray. She watched the mathematics of his miscalculation hit him like a physical blow. You left me to die for $5 million, Eileen continued. But it was never $5 million. It was 85. You calculated everything. The timing, the separation, the eventual reconciliation attempt. Everything except the actual amount. Everything except my will to survive. 85. Victor's voice came out as a whisper. Eileen, please. Please. If I'd known. If you'd known what? That I was worth more? Would that have changed anything? Would you have stayed and been a real father? Or would you have just adjusted your strategy? She leaned forward. It doesn't matter what you would have done, Victor. Because you calculated everything except my survival. You didn't know I'd be inheriting kingdoms. You just knew I'd be inheriting something. And you were willing to let your children die for positioning. I never wanted them to die. You left 3 6-week-old infants in 42-degree weather with no formula and a mother too malnourished to nurse them. What did you think would happen? Victor's composure shattered completely. He dropped to his knees beside her chair, tears streaming down his face. Please, Eileen, please. I'll spend my life making this up to you. I'll do anything. Anything. I made a mistake, I know that, but I love you, I love our children. Please don't do this. Eileen looked down at him. Wondered if the tears were real or just the final act in his performance. Decided it didn't matter. You'll spend your life knowing you had everything, she said quietly. A wife, 3 children, a future, and you traded it for what you thought would be a better deal. You'll read about us, Victor. You'll see the foundation I'm going to build. You'll see the lives we touch, the mothers and children we help. And you'll know you could have been part of it if you'd been capable of basic human decency instead of calculated cruelty. Eileen, please. Margaret pressed a button on her phone. The conference room door opened. 2 federal agents entered, badges visible. Victor Duval, the lead agent, said, You're under arrest for mail fraud, forgery, identity theft, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Victor's face went from devastated to stunned to desperate. Eileen, don't let them. You can't. We can work this out. But Eileen was already walking toward the door. Margaret beside her, one hand on her shoulder. In the adjacent room, a nanny waited with 3 sleeping babies, kept away from this ugliness, protected from seeing their father's final unraveling. Eileen didn't look back. Not when Victor called her name. Not when he started begging. Not when the agents pulled him to his feet and began reading him his rights. She walked out of that conference room and into the rest of her life, and left Victor Duval to face the consequences of treating human beings like chess pieces in a game he'd already lost. Victor's trial lasted 3 weeks, but the verdict took the jury less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: mail fraud, forgery, identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming: forensic analysis, surveillance footage, email logs, handwriting comparisons, and testimony from Jennifer Lassiter about Victor's previous patterns. The judge sentenced him to 22 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Mr. Duval, the judge said, her voice cold with disgust, you left 3 infants and their mother to die in winter because you calculated it would serve your financial interests. The only reason we're not discussing manslaughter charges is because Ms. Madison had the extraordinary strength to save herself and her children. You don't deserve the mercy this court is showing you. Eileen wasn't there for the sentencing. She'd testified during the trial. A single day of reliving the worst moments of her life. And that had been enough. Margaret attended on her behalf and called afterward with the news. 22 months, Margaret said. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's something. It's enough, Eileen said quietly, holding Noah while George and Chloe napped nearby. He's on record now. Any woman who Googles his name will know what he is. That's what matters. The media attention had been intense. Mother of triplets left to die, inherits millions, seeks justice, ran in the New York Times. CNN picked it up. So did the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, USA Today. Everyone wanted an interview, a photo, Eileen's personal story in her own words. She refused them all. "My children don't need to grow up with their trauma as entertainment," she told Margaret. "And I don't need to relive it for ratings. The court documents are public. That's enough." Instead, Eileen focused on recovery. Physical therapy to rebuild strength lost during those 5 days of starvation. Therapy, real therapy, not Victor's rehearsed performance, to process the betrayal and trauma. And most importantly, learning how to be a mother to 3 babies who were thriving now, gaining weight, hitting milestones, transforming from the fragile infants she'd carried through the snow into healthy, curious children. But she couldn't forget the other mothers. The ones still trapped in freezing apartments. The ones whose phones had been canceled, whose bank accounts had been drained, whose support systems had been systematically destroyed. The ones who wouldn't inherit millions, who had no Margaret Bernard to fight for them, who might not survive what Eileen had survived. 6 months after Victor's sentencing, Eileen founded the Madison Foundation. Sister Margaret was there for the incorporation papers. "What's the mission?" she asked. Eileen didn't hesitate. "No mother will ever face what I faced." The foundation started small, a single emergency housing facility in New York, 12 units reserved for mothers fleeing domestic situations with nowhere else to go. But Eileen didn't want to just provide shelter. She wanted to provide transformation. Each unit came with emergency supplies, formula, diapers, clothing, food. But also legal aid, attorneys who could help with restraining orders, custody battles, divorce proceedings. Medical care, doctors who understood trauma, who treated bodies and minds. Job training, skills that could lead to independence, not just minimum wage survival. "Justice isn't revenge," Eileen said at the Foundation's first board meeting. "Justice is making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Justice is building the support system I didn't have, so the next woman in my situation doesn't have to walk 10 blocks through a blizzard hoping she and her babies don't die." The triplets grew. At 1 year, they were thriving. Noah serious and watchful, George gregarious and charming, Chloe quiet but determined. Eileen took thousands of photos, documented every milestone, built a life that was theirs alone, untouched by Victor's shadow. People asked about their father. Well-meaning friends, concerned relatives of friends Eileen was slowly rebuilding relationships with. "Do the babies ask about him?" they'd wonder. "Not yet," Eileen would say. "But when they do, I'll tell them the truth. Age-appropriate truth, but truth. I won't teach them to hate him. But I won't lie about what he did either." The foundation grew faster than Eileen had anticipated. The first facility was full within a month. So she opened a second, then a third. Within 2 years, there were Madison Foundation facilities in 6 cities. Within 5 years, a statewide network across Massachusetts and New York. But Eileen didn't just write checks. She visited facilities, met mothers, held babies, listened to stories that echoed her own. Women who'd been isolated, controlled, abandoned. Women who'd survived impossible situations through sheer will. Women who needed someone to believe them when they said, "He seemed so nice at first." "I believe you," Eileen would say, "and we're going to help you build something better." The foundation's impact grew exponentially. Emergency housing, legal aid services that won custody battles and restraining orders, medical care that saved lives, job training that led to real careers, not just survival jobs but paths to independence, formula banks that fed babies whose mothers couldn't, diaper drives that provided dignity, 8,000 families housed over 18 years, 50,000 lives directly impacted. But the ripple effects, children who grew up safe instead of traumatized, mothers who escaped instead of enduring, patterns broken instead of perpetuated, those were incalculable. The triplets grew into children, then teenagers. Eileen told them about their father when they were 7, simplified but honest. "Your father made choices that hurt people. He left us when you were babies because he wanted money more than he wanted family. I survived, and I saved you, and we built something beautiful from something terrible." "Do you hate him?" Noah asked, always the most serious. "No," Eileen said honestly. "I hate what he did. But hating him would mean giving him space in my heart that belongs to you 3 instead." "Can we meet him someday?" Chloe wanted to know. "If you want to. When you're ready. But not because you need him. Just because you might need to understand where you came from." At 10, they learned the full story. age-appropriate but complete. At 15, they read the court transcripts. At 17, they understood not just what had happened, but what it meant. "You could have died," George said quietly, reading about the 42-degree apartment, the empty formula, the 5 days of starvation. "But I didn't," Eileen said. "And neither did you. That's what matters." In year 15 of his sentence, after serving his time and years of supervised release, Victor sent a letter to the Foundation's main office. It was forwarded to Margaret, who called Eileen immediately. "He wrote to you. Do you want to read it?" Eileen thought about it. The triplets were 16 now, preparing for college. The Foundation had just opened its 50th facility. She'd built a life beyond anything she could have imagined during those 5 days in the frozen apartment. "What does it say?" Margaret paused. "He apologizes. Says therapy has helped him understand what he did. Says he doesn't expect forgiveness, but wanted you to know he's trying to become better. It actually seems genuine. Though with him, who knows?" "Send it to me," Eileen decided. She read it that night. Victor's handwriting had changed, less controlled, more uncertain. The apology was rambling, self-aware in ways his trial testimony hadn't been. He talked about shame, about understanding the depth of his cruelty, about working with other inmates on their issues because helping them is the only way I can even begin to balance the scales. It might have been genuine. It might have been another performance. Eileen would never know for certain. She wrote back. A single page, careful and clear. "Victor, I forgive you, but that doesn't mean I'll ever forget. Forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me, so I don't carry hatred that would poison the life I've built. I hope you find a way to become the person you pretended to be during our marriage. Not for me. I've moved far beyond needing anything from you. Not even for our children, who have grown into remarkable people without you. But for yourself and for any future relationships you might have, so you don't hurt anyone else the way you hurt us. I won't be writing again. This is closure, not reconciliation. But I wanted you to know that what you meant for destruction became the foundation, literally, for something that has helped thousands of families. Your cruelty didn't win. My survival did. Eileen." She sent it without reading it again. Without second-guessing. It was done. Margaret called a week later. He received it. His counselor said he cried when he read it. Keeps it in his cell, reads it every day. "I hope it helps him," Eileen said. And she meant it, not because she cared about Victor's peace, but because a better Victor meant safer future partners, meant the cycle truly broken. Whether the letter brought Victor peace or torment, she would never know. But it didn't matter. That wasn't her burden to carry anymore. The Foundation's 18th anniversary gala was approaching. The triplets, now 18 themselves, preparing for college, had insisted on being involved in the planning. They'd grown up attending these events, understanding from an early age that their family's wealth meant responsibility. "We want to speak," Chloe announced one evening. "All 3 of us. Tell our story." "Are you sure?" Eileen asked. "Once it's public." "It's already public, Mom," Noah said gently. "The court records. The news coverage. We've lived with it our whole lives. But we want people to hear it from us. Who we became because of what happened. Not despite it, because of it." Eileen looked at her 3 children. Noah planning to study medicine, George committed to social work, Chloe headed to law school. All of them choosing careers in service, in healing, in justice. "Okay," she said. "Tell your story. Our story. Just remember." "We know," George interrupted with a grin. "It's not about him. It's about you. And everyone you've helped since." That was exactly right. The ballroom of the Four Seasons Boston glittered with the kind of understated elegance that came from having nothing to prove. Crystal chandeliers. Tables draped in champagne-colored linens. Centerpieces of white roses. Eileen had reclaimed them years ago, refusing to let Victor's memory taint flowers she'd once loved. The Madison Foundation's 18th anniversary gala drew a different crowd than most charity events. Yes, there were major donors, tech CEOs, old money families, politicians positioning themselves for photo opportunities. But there were also the mothers. Women who'd stayed in foundation housing, who'd rebuilt their lives with legal aid and job training, who'd brought their healthy children as living proof that survival was possible. Eileen stood near the edge of the ballroom, watching the crowd mingle. At 42, she'd grown into her power in ways the 24-year-old starving mother never could have imagined. Her auburn hair was shot through with silver now. She'd stopped coloring it at 35, decided that gray was earned. She wore a simple navy gown, elegant but not ostentatious. The only jewelry was her mother's thin gold necklace, the one she'd once pawned for diapers and had bought back the day the inheritance cleared. "You look contemplative," Sister Margaret said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. At 76, she moved more slowly than she used to, her steel-gray hair now completely white, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Having feelings about tonight?" "The triplets are speaking," Eileen said. "All 3 of them." They insisted. "They're remarkable young people. You raised them well." "We raised them well." Eileen took the champagne. "You've been Grandma Margaret since they were babies. You don't get to disclaim credit now." Sister Margaret's eyes grew misty. "Best unpaid job I ever had." Across the ballroom, Eileen spotted Margaret Bernard holding court with a group of younger attorneys. At 68, she'd become something of a legend in family law. The attorney who'd taken down Victor Duval and spent the next 18 years representing abused spouses pro bono through the foundation. She'd refused payment for her work with the Madison Foundation, declaring that some cases you take for money, some you take for justice. This one's for justice. She was godmother to all 3 triplets, had attended every birthday party, every school play, every milestone. Had been there the day they'd asked about their father, armed with age-appropriate explanations and infinite patience. The triplets themselves were backstage, preparing. Eileen had caught glimpses of them throughout the evening. Noah in his first real suit, looking impossibly adult. George charming the event coordinator. Chloe reviewing note cards with the focused intensity she brought to everything. 3 18-year-olds who'd been 6-week-old infants during those 5 days in hell. Who'd been so close to death that doctors later said another 12 hours would have been catastrophic. Who'd grown into brilliant, compassionate humans despite, or perhaps because of, knowing their origin story. Noah was headed to Harvard in the fall, pre-med, already talking about serving underserved communities. "People who don't have access to good health care," he'd explained. "People like we would have been if you hadn't saved us." George had chosen social work, specializing in family reunification. "I want to help families stay together when they should, and help them separate safely when they shouldn't," he'd said. "I want to know the difference." And Chloe, fierce, determined Chloe, was bound for Columbia law, focusing on family advocacy. "I'm going to be like Aunt Margaret," she'd declared at 16. "I'm going to protect people who can't protect themselves." All 3 of them choosing service careers. All 3 of them understanding that wealth meant responsibility. All 3 of them living proof that the cycle could be broken. 5 minutes, the event coordinator announced. Eileen made her way to the front, sliding into her seat beside Sister Margaret. Margaret Bernard joined them, squeezing Eileen's hand. "They're going to be wonderful," she murmured. The lights dimmed. The crowd settled. And Chloe walked onto the stage, flanked by her brothers. She looked so much like Eileen had at 24, the same auburn hair, the same hazel eyes, the same willowy frame. But where Eileen had been hollowed out by starvation and abuse, Chloe radiated strength. Confidence. The certainty of someone who'd been loved unconditionally her entire life. "Good evening," Chloe began, her voice steady. "My name is Chloe Madison. These are my brothers, Noah and George. We're 18 years old today, the same age as the foundation our mother built. And we wanted to tell you the story of why it exists." A photo appeared on the screen behind them. Eileen at 24, gaunt and hollow-eyed, holding 3 tiny infants. It had been taken at the medical facility the day after she'd been found. Eileen had never seen it before. She felt Margaret Bernard's hand tighten on hers. "This is our mother," Noah said, taking over the narrative. 5 days after our father left her to die in a freezing apartment with no food, no phone, no money, and 3 6-week-old babies who were starving. "That's me, George, and Chloe. We were so malnourished that doctors said another day would have killed us." George stepped forward. "Our father didn't leave because he couldn't handle being a parent. He left because he'd intercepted legal notifications about our mother's inheritance, $85 million from a pharmaceutical empire. He calculated that abandoning us at our most vulnerable would give him legal positioning to claim the money later. The room had gone completely silent. Chloe's voice grew stronger. He canceled her phone so she couldn't call for help. He drained their bank account. He intercepted mail. He installed surveillance software to monitor her communications. He systematically cut her off from every resource, every support system, every means of survival. And then he walked out the door and left us to freeze and starve. Another photo appeared. The apartment building, snow piled against the entrance. Then the shelter. Then Sister Margaret helping Eileen with the babies. What our father didn't calculate, Noah said, was our mother's will to survive. He didn't anticipate that she'd walk 10 blocks through a blizzard with 3 dying babies and no food in her own body. He didn't expect Sister Margaret O'Brien at Hope Haven Women's Shelter to ask the right questions. And he definitely didn't expect Margaret Bernard to prosecute him with the full force of the law. George smiled, gesturing to both Margarets in the audience. These 2 women saved our lives as surely as our mother did. But more than that, they showed our mother what justice could look like. Not revenge justice. Making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. Chloe's voice grew passionate. The Madison Foundation has housed 8,000 families over 18 years. Provided legal aid to 15,000 women. Distributed formula, diapers, and emergency supplies to 50,000 children. But the real number, the number that matters, is the mothers who didn't die. The babies who grew up healthy. The families that stayed together because someone gave them the resources to survive. Photos cycled behind them, mothers with babies, families in foundation housing, children at playgrounds, women at job training programs. Real people. Real lives saved. Our father is out of prison now, Noah said quietly. He served his time. We've never met him, though we know his story. Our mother made sure we understood what happened, but she never taught us to hate him. She taught us something more important. She taught us, George continued, that the greatest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's building something so beautiful from the tragedy that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. A footnote in a much larger story. Chloe stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. Tonight, we're asking you to be part of that story. To help us expand to 20 more cities. To double our legal aid services. To make sure that no mother in America ever faces what ours faced. Because every woman deserves to survive. Every child deserves to be safe. And every family deserves the chance to be what they could have been if cruelty hadn't intervened. The triplets stepped back, holding hands, as the final photo appeared on the screen. The 4 of them today, Eileen and her 3 children, healthy and whole and smiling. The ballroom erupted. Standing ovation. Tears on dozens of faces. Eileen stood with everyone else, crying openly as she watched her children. Her babies who'd been so close to death, take their bows. The donations started immediately. $5 million from the tech CEO. $3 million from the old money family. $2 million from a woman who approached the stage and whispered something to Chloe that made her daughter cry and hug her tight. By the time the pledges were counted, $15 million in new donations. The largest single-night haul in the foundation's history. Eileen was making her way to the stage to embrace her children when Margaret Bernard's hand caught her arm. "Eileen," she said quietly. "He's here." Eileen went still. "Where?" "Back table. Near the exit. He's been there since the speech started." Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. "He looks smaller than I remember." Eileen scanned the ballroom and found him. Victor Duval at 54, sitting alone at a table near the back. His hair was gray. His suit was inexpensive but clean. And his face, watching the triplets receive hugs and congratulations on stage, was a study in devastation. "Did you know he was coming?" Sister Margaret asked, appearing on her other side. "I sent him an invitation," Eileen admitted. "Through the foundation. I wanted him to see what we built. What his children became without him." And Margaret Bernard's voice was protective, ready to have security remove him if needed. Eileen looked at her 3 children, laughing, radiant, surrounded by people who loved them. Then she looked at Victor, alone in the back, watching the life he'd thrown away. "I'm going to talk to him," she decided. "Are you sure? It's time." She made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and hugs, but moving steadily toward the back table. On stage, she saw the triplets notice, saw Chloe's sharp gaze track her movement. They knew about the invitation. They'd asked to be present if this moment came. Eileen nodded to them. Stay there. Watch. But let me do this. Victor stood as she approached. Up close, the years were even more evident. Lines around his eyes, gray in his hair, but mostly an absence of the calculating charm that had once defined him. Eileen, he said quietly, thank you for the invitation. I wasn't sure I should come. But you did. She gestured to the empty chair. Sit. Let's talk. Victor sat, but his movements were careful, as if he was afraid of taking up too much space. Eileen studied him. This man who'd once controlled every aspect of her life now looked diminished, worn in a way that went beyond age. His suit was clean but outdated, probably 10 years old at least. His shoes were polished but resoled. Everything about him spoke of someone living on a tight budget, maintaining dignity through careful management of limited resources. Why did you come? Eileen asked. Victor's hands trembled slightly on the table. Chloe sent me an invitation. A formal one through the mail. I almost didn't open it. I see your foundation's name and usually just add my small donation and move on. But this one had personal invitation on the envelope. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. I didn't think she knew I existed. All three of them have known about you their entire lives, Eileen said. I never hid it from them. Age-appropriate honesty, always. They know what you did. They know why. And recently they asked if they could meet you. Victor's face crumpled. Why would they want to meet me? Not for reconciliation, Eileen said clearly. Not for forgiveness. But to understand where they came from. To see you as a real person, not just the villain in a story. To know what they didn't miss. What I am now, Victor said quietly, is an administrative assistant at a homeless services nonprofit. I make $38,000 a year. I live in a modest apartment in Queens. I volunteer at a food bank on weekends. I've been in therapy for 16 years. I don't date. I don't socialize much. I just exist. And try to do small good things to balance the enormous bad thing I did. Is it real? Eileen asked bluntly. The therapy, the volunteering, the quiet life? Or is it another performance? Victor was quiet for a long moment. I don't know anymore. I've been performing for so long. First the charming suitor, then the concerned husband, then the reformed convict. Maybe this is just another role. Or maybe it's who I actually am when I'm not trying to be someone impressive. He met her eyes. I've stopped trying to figure out which is real. I just try to do the next right thing, and the next, and hope that eventually the performance becomes genuine. It was, Eileen realized, the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. The children want to meet you, she said. Tomorrow, if you're willing. Lunch at a neutral location. Margaret Bernard will be present. And you need to understand, this isn't about your redemption. It's about their healing. You'll answer their questions honestly. You'll give them what they need from this encounter. And then you'll leave their lives and let them decide if they ever want contact again. No second chances, Victor said. It wasn't a question. No second chances, Eileen confirmed. You used yours when you walked out that door 18 years ago. Victor nodded slowly. I'll be there. I'll answer anything they ask. And Eileen, he hesitated. I know it means nothing now, but I am sorry. Not because I got caught, not because I went to prison, but because I finally understand what I destroyed. Therapy taught me the words for what I was. A narcissist terrified of being ordinary. When I saw that letter about your inheritance, I panicked because you were about to become extraordinary, and I was still just me. So I ran. And I left 3 babies to die because my ego couldn't handle being married to someone more successful than me. Eileen stood. Tomorrow. 1 o'clock. Bistro Laurent on Newbury Street. Don't be late. She walked away without looking back, returning to her children who waited on the stage, watching with the intense focus she'd taught them. See everything, judge carefully, but always lead with compassion until given reason not to. The next day, Bistro Laurent's private dining room held a table for 6. Eileen, the triplets, Margaret Bernard, and Victor. The restaurant had been chosen carefully. Public enough to feel safe, private enough for difficult conversations. Victor arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the same suit as the night before. The triplets arrived exactly on time, flanked by their mothers and godmother, 3 18-year-olds who moved with the confidence of people who'd been loved unconditionally their entire lives. Noah shook Victor's hand first. Formal, professional. Thank you for coming. George followed, his grip firmer. Assessing. We have questions. Chloe was last, her hazel eyes, so like Eileen's, studying Victor with the sharp gaze of someone who'd already decided to be a lawyer. We appreciate your honesty in advance. They sat, ordered food no one would really eat. And then Noah, always the most direct, asked the first question. Did you ever actually love us? Or were we just collateral damage in whatever you were planning? Victor didn't flinch from the question. I don't know if I was capable of love then. I don't know if I am now. When you were born, I felt overwhelmed. Terrified. 3 babies meant 3 times the responsibility, 3 times the expense, 3 times the evidence that I was ordinary. Just a man who'd gotten his wife pregnant, not someone special or impressive. I held each of you once in the hospital. You were so small. And all I could think about was how my life was over. But it wasn't your life that almost ended, George said quietly. It was ours. I know. I've known that every day for 18 years. Victor's voice was steady, but his hands shook. I see children everywhere, on the subway, in the park, at the food bank. And I think that could have been Noah. That could have been George or Chloe. If they'd died, that's what I would have killed. Not abstract concepts. Real children with personalities and futures and possibilities. Do you understand what your choices did? George pressed. Not just to us, but to our mother? Every day, Victor said. I see what your mother built. I read about the foundation, about the lives saved, about the mothers who didn't die because someone gave them resources I withheld. I see who you've become. 3 remarkable young people choosing service careers, choosing to help others. And I know I could have been part of something extraordinary, but I chose calculation over character. I chose my ego over everything that actually mattered. Chloe leaned forward. You sent Mom a letter. Years ago. Saying you were trying to become the person you pretended to be. Have you succeeded? I don't know, Victor admitted. I try. Every day, I try to be honest, to be helpful, to make amends through action since words are meaningless. But I'm also 54 years old, working an entry-level job, living alone because I don't trust myself in relationships. Is that growth or just fear? Is it genuine change or self-punishment? I genuinely don't know. The table was quiet. Margaret Bernard watched carefully, ready to intervene if needed, but the triplets were handling this with remarkable maturity. I don't forgive you, Chloe said finally. I might someday, but right now I don't. What you did was monstrous. You left 3 babies to die because you were threatened by our mother's success. She paused. But I understand you better now. That understanding doesn't erase what you did. It just makes it more tragic. You could have been part of our lives. You could have watched us grow up. But you chose your insecurity over us, and that's on you. Noah nodded. We needed to meet you to know we didn't miss anything worth having. And we didn't. We have a mother who's extraordinary, 2 Margarets who love us and each other. You're just the man whose DNA we share. That's all you'll ever be. That's more than I deserve, Victor said quietly. George was last to speak. Do you want to stay in our lives? Regular contact, updates, relationship? Victor looked at each of them in turn. What I want doesn't matter. What you need matters. If you need me gone, I'm gone. If you want occasional updates, I'll provide them. If you want nothing, that's what you'll get. I forfeited my right to ask for anything when I walked out that door. The triplets exchanged glances. That silent communication that had always fascinated Eileen, the way they could hold entire conversations without words. We'll think about it, Chloe said. We have your email from the invitation. If we decide we want contact, we'll reach out. Don't contact us first. Don't send letters or emails or show up at events. Let us decide if and when and how. Can you do that? Yes. Then we're done here, Noah said, standing. His brothers followed. They shook Victor's hand again, polite final, and left the restaurant without looking back. Victor sat alone at the table, watching them go. Eileen remained, letting Margaret escort the triplets to the car. That's the last time you'll see them unless they decide otherwise, Eileen said. You understand that? I understand. They're going to do extraordinary things with their lives. They're going to change the world in small and large ways. And you'll read about it in the newspaper like everyone else. Eileen stood. That's the price of your choices, Victor. Not prison. Not poverty. but knowing what you could have had if you'd been capable of basic human decency. She left him there, walked out into the bright afternoon, and climbed into the car where her children waited. That evening, the four of them sat on the balcony of their brownstone in Back Bay, overlooking the city lights. Winter had returned, the first snow of the season falling soft and thick, transforming the city into something clean and new. "I'm glad we met him," Noah said, watching the snow. "I'm more glad we grew up without him." "He's like a character from a story we've always known," George added. "Real, but also exactly who you told us he was. Knowing him doesn't change anything." Chloe leaned against Eileen's shoulder. "Thank you for never lying to us about him, but also never teaching us to hate him. You let us make our own judgments." Eileen held her daughter close, reaching for her son's hands. "You three are the best thing I've ever done. Not the foundation, not the lives saved, you. You're my legacy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. 18 years ago, snow had been an enemy, cold that could kill, winter closing in like a fist. But now it was just beautiful. Because they watched from warmth and safety and love. Because they'd survived. Because they'd built something extraordinary from something terrible. "The inheritance gave us resources," Eileen said quietly, more to herself than her children. "But the struggle, the choice to survive it together, gave us purpose. That's what matters most." Noah squeezed her hand. "We know, Mom. You tell us that story every winter. And I'll keep telling it," Eileen said, "until you're old enough to tell your own children. Because the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's understanding that you're stronger than you know, and that choosing to survive, choosing to thrive, is the best revenge against anyone who tried to destroy you." The snow fell faster now, covering the city in white. But inside, in the warm glow of home, for people who'd survived the impossible held each other and watched winter arrive without fear. Because they'd already survived worse. And they'd become something beautiful anyway.